The sound of a snapping finger is distinct. It is a sharp demand that cuts through the hum of server fans and the murmur of six-figure tech deals. When it happens 3 inches from your ear, it is a declaration of war. Hey, I guy. Earth to IT guy. I didn't look up immediately. I was 58 years old, and I was staring at a complex schematic for a fiber optic routing system. It was supposed to ensure the 37th floor didn't experience a thermal meltdown during the upcoming summer heat wave. My finger was tracing the line where the redundant chilled water loop intersected with the primary server annex. It was an ecosystem of industrial power that I had personally designed and leased to this startup 3 years ago. The fingers snapped again. "I know you can hear me," the voice drawled. It was Bryce. He was 26, wore a ridiculous fleece vest, and held the title of Director of Visionary Operations. That meant his father, Richard, was the vice president of the holding company. I turned my chair around. "Can I help you, Bryce?" "The Wi-Fi," he said, gesturing at the glass-walled conference room. Inside, 5 young guys were staring at a frozen Zoom screen. "It is lagging. We are pitching the Series B investors in 3 minutes. Fix it right now." I kept my voice level. I am a 58-year-old man in a tailored blazer, not a help desk tech. I am not your IT guy, Bryce. I am reviewing the physical infrastructure specifications for your lease renewal. If you have latency issues, submit a ticket to your internal portal. Bryce laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Excuse me, I do not submit tickets. I tell people to do their jobs. Fix the router, make the internet work." "I am busy," I said, turning back to the schematic, "and I do not have administrator access to your local network." Bryce slammed his hand on the table, rattling my coffee cup. The open plan office went silent. 60 employees stopped typing. "You know what?" Bryce shouted, his face flushing red. "I am sick of the attitude from the support staff in this building. My father pays a fortune for this lease. You are useless." He pointed at the door. "Get out. You are fired. I do not want to see your face on this floor again. I will have HR mail your final check. Go." I froze out of sheer scientific fascination. He was firing me. He actually believed he had the legal authority to fire me. "You are firing me?" I asked loudly, ensuring the office heard. "I am firing you," Bryce spat. "Pack your stuff and get out." I stood up slowly. I didn't argue. I didn't explain that I was not an employee, but the independent master leaseholder for the entire commercial tech zone. I didn't mention that the man he just fired held the master keys to the building's infrastructure. I simply closed my laptop. I picked up my folio, leaving the thick, unsigned 10-year renewal contract sitting exactly in the center of the table. "Understood," I said professionally. "Good luck with your pitch, Bryce." I walked to the elevator, feeling dozens of eyes on my back. As the doors slid shut, I saw Bryce high-fiving his buddy, thinking he had asserted dominance. He had actually just severed the main technological artery keeping his business alive. He just didn't realize it yet. I stepped into the lobby and nodded to the head of physical security, Luther. "Everything going smoothly up on 37?" Luther asked. "Not anymore, Luther," I smiled. 10 minutes later, sitting in the cafe across the street with my espresso, the chaos began. I wasn't there to witness it, but I knew the script. I had written it. Up on the 37th floor, Edgar, the senior building manager, stepped out of the service elevator. He was carrying a notary stamp and a bottle of champagne to celebrate the signing of the infrastructure lease extension. Edgar walked into the conference room and saw the unsigned folder. He also saw Bryce and his team looking panicked at their black Zoom screen. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Edgar boomed. "Where is Harlan? We have some ink to dry before the grandfathered pricing on your cooling unit expires at 5 p.m. Bryce scoffed, grabbing a sparkling water. "The old guy with the attitude? Yeah, I fired him." The entire room stopped. It was a suffocating silence. The HR director, who had just walked in, turned the color of bleached paper. Edgar blinked, setting the champagne down carefully. "I am sorry, Bryce. You did what?" "I fired him," Bryce repeated slowly. "He was incompetent. Couldn't fix the Wi-Fi. I told him to get out." Edgar stared at the empty chair, then at the unsigned contract. "Bryce," Edgar said, his voice trembling. "Harlan is not a vendor. He is not your IT guy. Whatever he is, we will replace him." Bryce waved his hand. "Harlan is the landlord," Edgar whispered. "What?" Bryce asked, his sneer faltering. "He is the independent infrastructure overseer," Edgar explained, panic setting in. He owns the exclusive rights to the fiber optic trunk you use. He holds the master control agreement for the dedicated chilled water loop, keeping your server room from catching fire. Bryce, he decides if this building has a pulse. Bryce laughed nervously. You are joking. He was rewriting your lease, Edgar yelled. You just fired the single person about to save your father's company $2 million in utility fees. Bryce looked at the folder. He flipped the cover open. Printed on the first page was Infrastructure Reliance Agreement, prepared by Harlan Vance, managing partner. Oh, Bryce let out a weak sound. Did he say anything before he left? Edgar asked, grabbing a chair. He said understood, Bryce mumbled. Edgar closed his eyes. Oh, dear God. He accepted the termination. Bryce, you didn't fire an employee. You just verbally terminated your own critical service contract. Down in the cafe, my phone lit up with a text from Edgar. Please tell me the kid is lying. I took a sip of espresso and didn't reply. My actual office is on the 4th floor, tucked away behind the massive mechanical rooms. It has a view of the backup diesel generators. It is the true brain of the building. I took the secure elevator down and unlocked the heavy steel door. I sat at my sprawling oak desk and woke up my workstation. I wasn't angry. I simply felt a profound obligation to the letter of the law. Guided by the doctrine of mutual rescission, I was legally bound to respect Bryce's explicit wishes. He had terminated our arrangement publicly. I pulled the massive client binder from my shelf and opened it to Section 14, Revocable Privileges. The base commercial lease only covers physical walls. The gigabit fiber and the dedicated HVAC loop are premium add-on amenities subleased through my firm. Bryce had just fired the sole provider of those amenities. I opened the central management software. Step 1, elevator priority. Next level paid $5,000 a month for VIP lift access. I clicked the drop-down, negotiation terminated by tenant. Revert to standard access. Now, those hotshot executives would have to wait in line with everyone else. Step 2, the freight elevator. They had a shipment of sensitive server racks arriving Tuesday. Access requires a digital token issued by me. I revoked the token. When that truck arrived, they would have to carry those racks up 37 flights of stairs. Step 3 was the climate control system. This was where the real pain would be felt. The standard AC keeps offices at 72 degrees, but a high-density server room generates massive heat. It requires a dedicated chilled water loop to prevent a meltdown. That cooling loop is my personal property. I pulled up the HVAC schematic. The chilled water flow to Suite 3700 was set to high priority subsidized. I typed in a new directive, set to base building standard. The mechanical valve actuators on the roof would slowly close. By tomorrow morning, their server room would be a sauna. I was not breaking the law. Under the principle of quantum meruit, I cannot be forced to provide uncompensated services. After a contract has been verbally repudiated, I was legally removing the premium services they no longer wanted. My secure red landline rang. It was Donovan, the brilliant corporate attorney for the property management firm. Harlan, Donovan sounded stressed. Edgar claims the VP's arrogant kid just fired you. He did indeed, I replied casually. Publicly and with 50 witnesses, he definitively terminated our working relationship. Donovan sighed heavily. What exactly are you doing right now? I am strictly adhering to the termination, I said. I am rolling back all uncontracted amenities. I cannot provide active infrastructure services without a signed liability waiver. If his servers overheat and I do not have a contract, I get sued. I know, Donovan said quickly. I am not asking you to stop. How bad is this going to get for them? I looked at my monitor hovering over the biometric locks tab. Well, I hope those executives enjoy using the public restrooms in the lobby. Understood, Donovan said with dark amusement. I will draft the liability deflection documents immediately. I pressed the execute button on my keyboard. The true beauty of world-class infrastructure is its invisibility. You assume it is a natural law of the universe, not a highly complex service rendered by a legal contract. Up on the 37th floor, the laws of physics were rapidly changing. Around 3:30 p.m., the expensive smart glass in the executive conference room stopped responding. It reverted to its unpowered state, completely transparent. Bryce was in the middle of a frantic yelling match, and suddenly the entire office could see him pacing like an angry mime. Then came the biometric security locks. The interior doors separating the developer bullpen from the executive wing relied on fingerprint scanners routed through my server. I quietly disabled their account. The electronic strikes failed safe. They popped open and refused to latch. The highly exclusive executive wing was suddenly wide open. Junior interns wandered in, and the noise from the sales floor flooded into Bryce's sanctuary. At 4:15 p.m., the real panic set in. I monitor all critical tenant emergency tickets. Ticket 942, server room temperature alert. Current temp 78 degrees and rising. Ticket 943, bathroom access denied. Executive washroom keycards unresponsive. Ticket 944, internet connectivity flickering. Massive packet loss. Bryce clearly didn't understand what his operation ran on. The fiber optic trunk line was a split configuration. Without my prioritization code, their massive data packets were now fighting for bandwidth with the dental call center on the 8th floor. Next level's crucial video calls looked like 8-bit retro video game art. I sat comfortably in my office, watching the temperature gauge climb. 79 degrees, 80 degrees. My email pinged, a message directly from Bryce. Subject, glitch. Hey, the AC is acting up and the doors are being weird. Come up here and take a look. Need it fixed ASAP. No apology, just an arrogant demand. He still fully believed he held the power. I did not reply. I dragged the email into a secure legal folder labeled Evidence of Unauthorized Service Request Post-Termination. 5 minutes later, Edgar called my secure landline. Harlan, the kid is screaming in the main lobby, Edgar whispered urgently. He is trying to bully old Bill into physically hacking the thermostat. Bill cannot hack that thermostat, I said calmly. It is encrypted with a 256-bit key and hardwired into my logic controller. I know that, Edgar sighed, but he is threatening to sue the building management for breach of habitable workspace. Let him try, I chuckled. The base lease guarantees 74 degrees for standard office spaces. It does not guarantee industrial cooling for a server farm. That was the addendum he refused to sign right before he fired the provider. He is demanding to know where the IT guy went, Edgar warned. Inform him my services have been officially terminated, I instructed. As a severed vendor, I am no longer legally authorized to enter his premises. He is threatening to call his father the VP, Edgar said. I am counting on it, I replied, and hung up. By 5:30 p.m., the server room hit 82 degrees. The automated hardware safety protocols kicked in. The massive server racks aggressively throttled their CPU speeds to prevent permanent hardware damage. Their crucial pitch deck was now uploading at dial-up modem speed. I checked the freight elevator camera. A confused delivery guy stood there with 10 pizzas for the tech team. He swiped his access card. Red light. He shrugged and dumped the pizzas at the front desk. Bryce's elite team was going to be hungry, uncomfortably hot, and stuck with painfully slow internet. While Bryce was sweating through his designer fleece, I straightened my tailored blazer. I had a dinner meeting scheduled for the next evening, but I decided to move it up. I walked across the street to the Capitol Grill. I was meeting Wallace, the seasoned CEO of Omnitech Solutions. Omnitech was Next Level's biggest direct competitor. They were a solid company currently crammed into an undersized sublet on the 12th floor, desperately begging for more fiber bandwidth. Richard had outbid Wallace for the prime 37th floor infrastructure 3 years ago. Wallace stood up from the leather booth. Harlan, he shook my hand firmly. Is everything going all right with the renewals upstairs? The landscape is changing rapidly, Wallace, I said, sliding into the booth. I placed a pristine folder on the table and ordered a Pinot Noir. I have a highly unique situation. A massive block of high-priority infrastructure capacity has literally just become available. Redundant fiber loops, dedicated cooling, and VIP elevator priority. Wallace raised a thick gray eyebrow. I thought Next Level had that locked down for another 5 years. The renewal was explicitly rejected, I said carefully. The tenant representative publicly terminated the negotiation and fired the provider. Under the doctrine of mutual rescission, I must mitigate my financial losses. Wallace stared at me in total silence. He didn't ask for gossip. He only looked at the business opportunity. How much raw capacity? Enough to run your entire experimental AI division, I replied. And I can digitally divert the bandwidth to your servers on the 12th floor in 10 minutes. And the cost? Wallace asked. Standard market rate, I stated, plus a 15% signing bonus for the expedited setup and a 5-year legal commitment. Wallace smiled like an apex predator. If you can get me that bandwidth by tomorrow morning, I will sign the 5-year deal right here. I have the finalized contract right here, I said, tapping the folder. I can have it rerouted before the stakes arrive. We spent 45 minutes meticulously reviewing every clause. Wallace treated me with exact respect. As I signed the countersignature, my smartphone buzzed. Alert! Tenant 3700 attempting unauthorized physical access to high-voltage breaker panel 4. Bryce was getting desperate. "Everything all right?" Wallace asked. "Just a minor predictable glitch," I said. "So, Wallace, I have an open slot for the heavy freight elevator on Tuesday morning. Any equipment you need to move in? We have brand new server racks sitting in a hot warehouse right now." Wallace grinned. "Bring them in." I raised my glass. I walked out with a legally binding contract worth $1.8 million over 5 years. I had legally sold Bryce's digital lifeline to his biggest rival. And because the fiber cables physically ran through the 37th floor ceiling to reach the 12th floor, Bryce would literally be sitting underneath his competitor's blazing fast internet, listening to it hum. The next morning, Friday, the heavy machinery of corporate legal teams ground into gear. I was sipping coffee at my desk at 8 a.m. Tenant 1200, Omnitech, network efficiency 99%. Tenant 3700, next level, packet loss 68%. Ambient server temperature 85 degrees. At exactly 8:15 a.m., my secure phone rang. It was Donovan, the general counsel for Next Level's parent corporation. Harlan, Donovan's expensive voice was strained to its limits. "Our satellite office claims the building is experiencing a catastrophic failure of utility services." "Donovan," I replied pleasantly, "I must correct your legal terminology. The building is functioning flawlessly. The premium utility services to Suite 3700 have simply been realigned to match their current contractual status." "Contractual status?" Donovan paused, shuffling paper. "I have the master lease right here. It runs through 2028. You have the base commercial lease," I gently corrected. Addendum C. Subsection 4 states the high-speed fiber and enhanced cooling are month-to-month auxiliary services. Your on-site executive, Bryce, explicitly and publicly terminated the provider of those services yesterday. There was a long, incredibly expensive silence. "He verbally fired you?" "He did indeed," I confirmed. "He insulted my professional competence and ordered me to vacate immediately. As per the harassment clauses in my vendor agreement, I complied immediately." "Harlan," Donovan's voice dropped its polish. "The kid is an arrogant idiot, but we absolutely cannot have these systems offline. What dollar amount do we need to authorize to turn the switch back on?" "Under normal circumstances, I would reopen the negotiation," I said, leaning back. "But the massive infrastructure capacity has already been legally acquired by another party." "Acquired?" Donovan choked. "You sold our internet?" "I sold the available internet," I corrected firmly. "The doctrine of commercial efficiency demands I mitigate my losses." "Okay," Donovan said, breathing raggedly. "I am calling Richard and the kid. We need an emergency meeting today. I am fully booked today." I lied smoothly. "I can squeeze you in for a brief meeting on Monday morning at 9 a.m. Monday?" Donovan was horrified. "Our server hardware will literally melt by Monday morning. Then I highly suggest you advise your team to power down all non-essential hardware," I said helpfully. "I will see you on Monday, Donovan. And remind Bryce to bring a working pen." Over the weekend, the 37th floor became completely unlivable. The ambient temperature stabilized at a suffocating 86 degrees. The circulation fans defaulted to minimum turnover speed. It smelled like melting plastic and corporate desperation. Most of the staff went home on paid vacation. Only Bryce and a tiny skeleton crew of exhausted developers remained behind, fighting industrial heat with tiny plastic desk fans. Monday morning arrived, 9:01 a.m. The biometric keycards rely on a cryptographic code that must update via the network every 72 hours. Since their network connection was essentially dead, the update completely failed. At 8:45 a.m., 40 angry employees were clustered around the security turnstiles in the marble lobby. Their badges flashed red. Luther blocked the path, refusing entry. Bryce was standing there, wearing the exact same clothes from Friday. I confidently walked through the glass barriers with my master access card. "You!" Bryce screamed, lunging forward. He completely locked us out of our own office. "I did not lock you out, Bryce," I said calmly to the massive crowd. "Your security protocol requires a digital network handshake. You currently do not have an active network connection. Therefore, you no longer have valid credentials. It is simple math. Fix it right now," he shrieked, losing his last shred of dignity. "I have a scheduled meeting with the authorized tenant representatives," I said coldly. "You just look like an angry trespasser trying to bypass security." I turned and took the executive elevator to the 4th floor. At 9 a.m. sharp, the heavy door to the interrogation room opened. Edgar walked in sweating, followed by Donovan looking exhausted. Then came Richard, the VP, wearing a bespoke suit and eyes like chipped flint. Finally, Bryce slowly trailed in, looking like a severely beaten dog. They sat down. I sat alone on the other side. "Harlan," Richard started, his voice a low gravel. "My company is losing $50,000 an hour. My idiot son made a terrible mistake. We formally apologize." He nudged Bryce violently. "I am sorry," Bryce mumbled bitterly. "Can we please turn the internet back on now?" I looked at Richard. "The real problem here is strictly a legal and professional one." I pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This is the legally voided contract. As of late Friday, the massive bandwidth allocation previously reserved for Next Level was officially released to the open market, and it has already been legally purchased by Omnitech Solutions." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "You maliciously sold our private fiber lines to our biggest competitor?" "I legally sold my own private fiber lines to a paying client with a legally binding contract," I corrected sharply. "You only had a verbal handshake that your arrogant representative threw in my face." "Undo it," Richard commanded. "We will pay double." "I cannot undo it," I shook my head. "It is an ironclad, 5-year binding legal agreement. Are you saying we just don't have any internet access?" Bryce piped up, cracking with fear. "You have the standard base-building DSL speeds," I said. "It is completely unusable for your visionary operations. We cannot run our massive logistics platform on a dial-up connection," Bryce shouted. "Then I strongly suggest you begin looking to relocate," I said coldly, looking him dead in the eye, "because this building can legally no longer support your technological needs." Richard stared in total, horrifying silence. He realized the sheer, catastrophic magnitude of the screw-up. "You are actively evicting us," he whispered. "I am just the humble landlord, Richard," I said, standing up. "I just provide the concrete walls. If you want industrial cooling and gigabit data, you desperately need a friend in the infrastructure business. And as of last Thursday, you no longer have one." I paused at the door. "Oh, and Bryce, the freight elevator is fully booked for Omnitech tomorrow. If you need to move out, you will have to wait until late Wednesday. I would strongly suggest using the fire stairs." On Wednesday, Next Level officially began their relocation. I flagged the freight elevator for emergency maintenance, so they had to physically dismantle their massive multi-million-dollar server racks piece by piece and carry them down the tiny service elevator. Bryce wasn't there. Richard had aggressively reassigned him to be the director of special projects at a tiny warehouse in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where the internet still runs on ancient copper wire. Good luck, Bryce. Next Level was forced to break their 10-year base lease, paying a massive multi-million-dollar penalty. Omnitech moved into the 37th floor suite 2 months later. The ownership group sent me a very heavy bonus check for aggressive yield management. 6 months later, Wallace was happily signing off on a new request for additional power lines. "We are incredibly happy to be here," Wallace smiled warmly. "My young nephew is starting an internship next week. He arrogantly thinks he knows everything, but I explicitly told him that the absolute very first person he introduces himself to is Harlan. I told him if he ever snaps his fingers at you, I will personally throw him off the roof." I smiled a real genuine smile. "I think he will do just fine here, Wallace, as long as he clearly understands exactly where the power comes from." I walked back to my windowless office bunker. Server temperature, perfect 72 degrees. Network bandwidth, 100% optimal capacity. Tenant satisfaction metrics, perfect score. I filed the Omnitech contract in the steel cabinet. The massive building hummed deeply around me. It was breathing, it was alive, and absolutely everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. My professional dignity was fully intact. And somewhere out in a dusty warehouse in Tulsa, a 26-year-old kid named Bryce was desperately waiting for a simple PDF file to load. The corporate world is a funny place. If you know the system well enough, the consequences always find their way to the right inbox. Quiet, legally sound moves will permanently beat loud, arrogant egos every single time.